there's been an illusion that big companies equal safety. And I think that the illusion has been revealed as a falsity. Like, it's not real. And you're seeing it more and more. And the amount of people that are stunned at big companies from these layoffs shows exactly that the contract has changed. So are early stage companies safer? I think you have to define what safety means.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, I have the HR Heretics on the show, Kelli Dragovich and Nolan. Kelli has led teams at places like Looker, Google, and Pendo, and Nolan brings experiences to the table from Carta, DoorDash, and his own startup, Continuum. They're the cool HR people you wish you had in your corner. On this episode, we cover the current vibes in tech right now and what's going on with all these TikTok layoffs, the difference between a RIF and a role elimination from a legal perspective, what severance packages look like from crappy to great on a spectrum, why attrition rates are stupid and carry little signal, and if quiet quitting is still going on. These two hold no punches. They give straight answers to all my tough questions on layoffs, the job market, and employment best practices. It's always fun when the quote-unquote back office people get together for a meeting of the minds. I call it strategic back office. If you are a CFO, CHRO, or really anyone employed in the world of tech, this is a must-listen to better comprehend your place in the ever-changing job market. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. As a SaaS CFO, I know firsthand how difficult it is to report on SaaS metrics. We've all seen a deal close at the end of the month, but the customer's contract doesn't actually start until the middle of the next month, creating the classic discrepancy between bookings or committed ARR and actual ARR, the real stuff. That's why I'm so pumped to be partnering with Maxio, a company trusted by thousands of SaaS companies to understand these reporting nuances. They basically built and automated the SaaS dashboard I tried to manually cobble together for 3 years. In 2022, SaaS Optics and Chargify combined to become Maxio, the only billing and financial operations platform that was purpose-built for B2B SaaS. They're helping SaaS finance teams automate billing and RevRec, manage collections and payments, and put together investor-grade reporting packages. Visit maxio.com/runthenumbers to learn how Maxio can help you supercharge financial operations in 2024. Request a demo using the Run the Numbers link and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/runthenumbers. Quick math, the less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. Now, through April 15th, NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind flexible financing program. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, you know your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please go there, guys. I really need it. I am privileged to be here with the HR Heretics themselves, Nolan and Kelli. Thanks for joining me again.
Happy to be here again, CJ.
What's up, CJ? It's Heretics, by the way, bro.
So whenever I hear your name, I always think of the Salem witch trials.
That's
Is
the
that
idea.
weird?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. Kelli and I say this stuff out loud that no one else has the audacity to say.
You know how that ended, though, right?
It's perfect because I call Nolan a witch all the time.
Contrarians are back in style these days.
As long as it's quick, CJ, I'm fine with it. Make it quick.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah, that was a tough ending. I wanted to ask you, what are the vibes like these days? I've been seeing some TikTok videos of people getting laid off. Apparently, that's a thing now to record it. Any reactions to those videos? Is that the normal thing to do now?
Yeah, me and Kelli have been talking about this a bunch. The way I'd frame it is the contract between employer and employee has changed and has changed very quickly. And so if you go back to, the times of the Great Resignation, which are certainly over, that's when we started to feel the changing happening, and it was employees that were leaving. Now the inverse is happening to where employers are doing mass layoffs. We've lost 500,000 jobs in tech since 2022. And people once thought that they had stability, especially working at big tech. I know many Googlers, Kelli and I were talking about this yesterday, who were at Google for like 10, 15, 20 years and were impacted by layoffs and were completely stunned to have lost their jobs. And so I think there's this contract that people thought they had, but what they actually had was at-will employment. And they're feeling the negative consequences of at-will employment. And so the way that they're responding is by trying to capture the bad behavior. And so as the rise of social media obviously has happened, you're starting to get employees that are filming getting laid off. I think in some sense it's good because employers need to be held accountable. And given that there have been so many people impacted by layoffs, you don't really hear about the bad actors at all anymore. Like the tech press doesn't have time to cover this. But when there's a bad layoff like at Cloudflare and the employee doesn't get to even talk to their manager and doesn't understand why they're being impacted, and they record it and they post it, that stuff's going viral right now. Now, on the other hand, the employee that's doing that, Kelli and I have been talking about this privately for a couple of weeks, and then we did an episode on it. I don't think that person's ever going to be employed again if the employer knows that they recorded it. Because the story I would tell myself is, so are you just having your phone on record all day long as we talk about our business? Like, how can I trust you if that's what you're doing when I'm not aware? So that's my take on it.
I think my add on this too, CJ, just from the millennial standpoint, is the rules are changing out there. It's just a different environment, right? I started 24 years ago. I was 22. I was, millennial back then. You didn't do that stuff. You did what the company said. Yes, may have another. That's how we were raised. And all that's out the fucking window. And I think it's going to be a really interesting, next generation for these, whatever it is, CFOs, chief people officers, business leaders. The next 25 years are going to have to work within this. And it's unruly. Its rules are getting broken. Millennials are feeling like they can do what they want. I mean, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but they're pushing back. And I think it's just a different landscape out there. And it feels a little messy out there right now with everything going on in the world and the environment and the economy and these companies. It just feels a little unruly.
I think what feels messiest about it is you can pretty confidently say that both sides did something kind of shitty, right? I wouldn't want an employee recording stuff, but I also wouldn't want an employer telling me that I'm being eliminated because I sucked at my job and they have no metrics or story of what I did wrong to fall back on. How do you square the two? It's just this crappy situation in one of these.
Whether it's legal or not, I think it's a strange thing to do, is record things without people knowing.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's I just think it's a strange, I'd feel odd about doing it. However, if that's what it takes, as we talked about, Nolan, to uncover some of this really terrible behavior and poor practices that, in my opinion, should not be legal. I mean, I do applaud that. We said it's unfortunate it got to that point, but I do understand the why behind it. And just as the spotlight might be on that employee now for not great behavior, the spotlight will be on that company now and that leadership team for not great behavior.
One of my rules for the teams that I've managed is assume that this document or this conversation ends up on the front page of the New York Times. I've always operated that way. And I think what's been happening in tech for the last couple of years is, well, this company laid people off and they didn't really put a whole lot of effort into it. They didn't give a whole lot of severance. And so, why the fuck should we? And it's been a little bit of a race to the bottom, especially in early stage tech. And so, I think you're seeing the counter to that, which is, well, I have to protect myself. And how can I protect myself? Well, I just record what's going on. And so I think that's one piece. I think the other piece that nobody's really calling out around these record my layoff situations is everyone's trying to build their own social presence. And once one person recorded their layoff, then there was 5 others within the course of the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, there were. Some of them were cringe. One girl looked like she was almost celebrating, like she was promoting the post as if she was in Cabo. And I was like, dude, you just got laid off.
Well, why is that happening? Right. And so I think if you kind of get underneath the thing, I think a lot of that has to do with, well, I'm trying to grow my own social presence. And again, depending on what these people have planned next, maybe that makes sense. Maybe they're growing an audience to then go launch a product, but likely they're not really thinking through beyond likes and followers what this means for their career. And I just think as an employer, you have to start looking into people's social media presence. And it's shocking how often it doesn't happen. And my take is, if I was ever aware that you recorded a layoff, there's no chance I would ever hire you.
Yeah, I agree. Now, maybe a controversial that you'll both bite my head off. This whole metrics thing, the training and the guidance is not to go 20,000 leagues under the sea with every single person you're laying off and talk about the ins and outs of their performance, their metrics, their day-to-day.
Yep.
You're usually making these decisions, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. It's a more generalized, we can get into the spirit of the legal weighting and the criteria and all this. It's not splitting hairs in that aspect. And the guidance is not to also talk about every call, every performance that you have had with the company in those conversations. Those conversations are meant to be 5-minute conversations and follow-ups as necessary. So I don't know the details. Maybe they don't know what they're doing, but to benefit of the doubt, it is not customary to go into that level of detail in these conversations with folks that can be a little bit emotional in the moment, unruly. I mean, we saw it in this example. So maybe they don't again, but I will just say that before we chastise the people that communicated this. They didn't know what they were doing or didn't have metrics.
It's a good point, Kelli. The traditional guidance when you're terminating somebody is to communicate the decision, not everything that led up to the decision.
Correct.
And if you're doing a termination appropriately, and it's not a layoff, right? There's a difference here. This is a termination or a performance issue. That should have been communicated along the way. And so oftentimes what the TikTok audience isn't seeing is all of the conversations that led up to that event. And you're only getting the event. And the event, as Kelli and I have been taught, and as we probably teach our teams, is decision is made. We're not here to relitigate the decision. We're here to communicate the decision and next steps. And so I think oftentimes you're only getting one side of the story. And that side of the story in that conversation does look like shit. It's terrible.
Maybe a weird question, but in your experience, when you're communicating that message to somebody, people panic. It's a 30-minute calendar invite. Yeah. How long do they last? Is it like a 4-minute call in reality?
Very short. It's usually very short. Funny story. I remember when I was at Yahoo, we did 2 big layoffs. We nicknamed them Rose and Rose 2. Do not ask me why. And we were literally mapping, everyone was in the office, right? We were literally mapping out conference rooms, 10 minutes, hundreds and hundreds of people, 10 minutes in conference room A, floor 4. Boom, next person. You're in conference room A, floor 4, 5 minutes after that. And the guidance was very strict, it is the decision and it is moving on. And then if you need to repeat it, it's the decision and it's moving on. And that's why usually the HR person's there to help. An inexperienced manager can sometimes get pulled in to the quicksand and all of a sudden you're 2 hours in and we don't know up from down.
Take me back to that. How many did you have to do in one day yourself, Kelli?
Oh, well, we were kind of managing the process. So we were kind of like the control center, but there was hundreds.
Yeah, I mean, Carta did the layoff in COVID. We were one of the first companies to move. And I think we did 120, 130 employees. And it was important to us to have direct conversations with their manager as opposed to like the email that you're starting to see. And that's actually an interesting point. One of the reasons you're starting to see more emails than you are like these in-person conversations is because companies don't want to be recorded. And so it's like, hey, if this email is going to get out, like that's fine. But this conversation is brutal. And now companies are aware that they're being recorded. But I do think like this is where this pendulum swings, right? And a lot of people leaders are trying to be human centered. They're trying to treat people with dignity and respect.
Yeah.
But if it's not reciprocated, you're going to see the pendulum swing back and you're just going to see emails and no conversations.
Yeah. And this is where I'm old fashioned. Like I have just been very vocal about avoiding at all costs because it is easier and it is less like human and it's less uncomfortable and blah, 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 blah. Look, I'm not saying that sometimes companies have to based on resources or timing or they're pinched and they need to do that. But you can always follow up in person. You can always actually like touch a fucking human. It's just, there's no excuse. There's literally no excuse.
The business case for it is if the company is still surviving beyond this moment, which in almost all cases they are, you have employees that are still there, that are still working, whose friends have been impacted, who they are now talking to about how they were treated.
That's correct.
And so like, am I going to show up motivated if you just treated my friend like shit? Like, do I really want to still work here? Do I really want to like put everything into it for you? And so even though these moments suck, treating people with dignity and respect is the business case because you have people that are remaining whose friends were impacted that they're going to talk to and they're going to hear about how they were treated.
And you said it, people fucking remember. That leader's going to work for another company down the street 3 years later, and it's just not good form.
Yep.
There's a business impact to treating people like a human. I like how you tied it back to that.
There is a huge business impact, and the best part about it, it's like deadly. It doesn't show up on a P&L. You don't see it, but it just literally like takes you down. That is like the dirty secret of people, roles and people is that they are like, they can be great or they can be deadly. And you usually don't even like realize it's happening.
One of my biggest learnings in tech is that the community is way smaller than you think it is. And these stories get out. Kelli and I were at HR Transform, which is the biggest HR conference in the country last week. And we heard a lot about layoffs last week. We heard a lot from people leaders about how their CEOs were handling these things, both positive and negative. And that's the thing is like, especially in today's world with how connected we are, there is no hiding from it. And so it's hyper connected and people will find out.
Nolan, you used the word role elimination and you said layoff. Is there a difference legally between the two? Are they one and the same?
So the way to think about it is a role elimination is like when it's a specific job or a specific position that we're taking out of the company. A layoff traditionally has to do with like an economic downturn or budget cuts or something like that, to where it's a larger swath of the company and it isn't just like one role or a couple of roles impacted.
But I've also seen companies that do 5%, pick whatever, single digit number you want, 5% riffs pretty regularly to weed out poor performers. I think actually Snowflake was pretty famous for doing that.
Microsoft as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're starting to hear this more. I mean, Chamath was talking about it at All In last week. It's where he's like, the bottom 15% get managed out every year. And so that is not a layoff. That is a performance-based removal of employees, right?
I used to work with someone who was saying it's not a layoff where we're cutting the dead wood.
Exactly.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Well, you know what I always say, maintaining compliance is never complete, which is why most security and IT teams feel like they're always in audit purgatory. I'm there right now. But there is a solution, and it's easier than you think. Escape the infinite loop by using Thoropass's compliance and audit solution. Thoropass is the only solution using AI-infused technology and in-house auditors to take your team from start to stamp without leaving the platform. As a winner of multiple G2 awards, including top awards for usability and service, your team is in good hands with Thoropass. From onboarding with dedicated experts to audits from in-house auditors who know every aspect of your framework needs, you can have complete confidence in your Thoropass compliance journey. Thoropass is the only solution to offer audits for your most needed security frameworks. I'm talking HIPAA to HITRUST and SOC 2 to ISO 27001. Woo! If you need PCI, DSS, pen tests, or any other major compliance framework, Thoropass can hook you up. With Thoropass, you never need to worry again. Relax, we fix audits. Find more at thoropass.com. That's thoropass.com. Tell them your boy CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Boom. Reduce burn, extend runway, do more with less. Operational efficiency. These are all catchphrases that we know all too well because of the headwinds business leaders face in today's growth environment. Growth is now a battle, not a breeze. While teams are on the front lines fighting every day for top-line yardage, there are hidden savings opportunities right beneath their feet. That's where Tropic comes into play. Their procurement platform brings order and process to a historically decentralized and chaotic business function: purchasing and supplier management. Tropic serves as the front door for procurement that your entire company will want to use. By combining intake forms, pricing benchmarks, approval workflows, and supplier management all in one place, Tropic makes savings opportunities easy to find and act on. When you pour blood, sweat, and tears into revenue growth, doesn't it make sense to protect what you have fought for? Visit tropicapp.io/metrics to learn how modern businesses are controlling spend to extend their runway. Your board will thank you. Your budget will thank you. Your bottom line will thank you.
I think what's changed over the course of the last few years is managing out the bottom X percent has come in vogue, but employees are not aware that that's how the company manages performance. And so I think that's been the thing that's confused people is, wait, I didn't know that we managed out the bottom 15% every year.
I didn't realize that was part of the game we were playing.
Totally. One of the things Kelli and I have been talking a lot about is just be candid about who you are. Like, tell people who you are and then give them the opportunity to vote with their feet, both in the recruiting process on the way in, do they want to join? Or while they're there, I think Coinbase has probably done this better than any big tech company, is like, hey, like, we've actually changed. We're telling people we've changed. Now you can decide to leave and we'll give you severance to leave.
Right. The packages are very similar as far as that goes. I mean, GE back in the day, I think, did a good job of being very open about this. You know, I don't know. I struggle with like the seasonality of that strategy. Once a year, we're going to do this. We should always be doing it, like managing out low performers. It should just be a rolling thing. And you can do it slowly and painfully through whatever you want to call it, you know, feedback, email, documented feedback, performance improvement plan. Or you can rip the Band-Aid off really quickly, CJ, and give a package similar to like a RIF or a layoff or an elimination package. You sign your agreement and you're out. So it's the speed of that. But, you know, the whole seasonality of it always was odd to me because it's an unnatural thing. Like, okay, May 1st, these 50 people, like, you got to have those conversations at the right time and fork them out at the right moment. So I always found it a little odd.
Yeah, but Kelli, I think the reason why you're seeing that now is because managers are terrible at firing. Yeah,
but again, now we're taking the easy way out. So they're terrible at firing, so we're giving them a shortcut.
I hear you. But when you get to, you know, a large enough scale, thousands of employees, right? And if managers are terrible at firing, and HR teams are getting cut, right? Like, let's be super clear about this. You know, the HR support system is much thinner than it's been in the last 10 years.
Yep.
And so you have thousands of employees, hundreds, if not thousands of managers at these companies, and they don't really have a HRBP or a support system. And so, you know, the traditional human nature thing is like, oh, like, this is a tough conversation. I'll kick the can down the road. That's what most humans do.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the reason why the seasonality performance-based riff is happening, is like, it's so hard for people to do this unless they're forced, unless it's coming top down. I agree with you. It's not the best way to do it, but I feel like CEOs and company leaders think it's the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah, and I hear that. Look, I mean, you know me, I see all the angles. There's a time and a place for everything. But I would say that it disrupts the business arguably more. It's way more fucking expensive. I mean, you're going to pay out the nose for shortcuts. Fine. You know, you don't want to do the work and blah, blah. You just want to get CG out of the company. You wanted to sign that separation agreement. You're going to pay for that. So it's more expensive. And some people like to hide these things under role eliminations. Nolan's not that great. I don't really want to deal with telling him he's not that great. So I'm going to tell him we don't need his IC3 level job anymore. You can't replace that job for 6 months.
Well, you're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to, but you can open up at an IC4, hire someone else.
It's hard to litigate. I've personally never seen the role elimination thing litigated. I know that is the employment guidance.
Yeah. But at FANG companies, they follow it like maniacs.
That is true.
At our companies, it's a little more squishy. So, I'm giving you the text by the book answer here.
The other cost, though, again, when you're clear about who you are and how you manage performance, it's just part of the expectation. It's no surprises. When you surprise people with it, then I think not only do you have a financial cost associated with doing it, you also have the remaining employees who are on edge cost and are less productive and less engaged.
It's a great point.
And so I worked at a company to where they did this before I started. I didn't know about it. And literally the employees, they coined a term called the Halloween massacre.
Oh,
now we're back to the Salem witch trials.
Literally, it was they're like, hey, did you hear about the Halloween massacre last year before you showed up? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And that was a year later. People were still talking about that and on edge that this could happen at any moment in a surprise fashion.
That is such a good point. And it does encapsulate a culture of fear. Netflix had this for a while, right?
Yeah.
And they celebrated it. Again, clarity of identity. But you just got to know what you're getting, man, because pros and cons to everything. Pick the pros and mitigate the cons.
That was a clip, though, Kelli. You said that shortcuts are expensive. And I wanted to ask, if you had to draw a spectrum for a severance package upon layoff for just a rank and file employee, so not an exec. We all know that there are other pieces to that golden parachute with equity, et cetera. What's crappy versus good versus great? Weeks of pay, healthcare.
Oh, man. Some of these companies are giving 2 weeks, which I think is...
Some are giving 0, Kelli.
Some are giving 0.
Wait, that's a thing?
That is I have a friend who was laid off from a very well-regarded tech company that everyone in this conversation knows. That later, 0.
That's fucked up.
It's becoming
it's
more
so
normal.
Fucked up. I think 2 weeks is fucked up. So it's becoming more normal. And most companies do not give COBRA, right?
They don't pay for COBRA.
Sorry, they don't pay for COBRA. So your benefits end whenever, the end of the month.
And then you have to pay it, and you don't realize how much the company is subsidizing because nobody does that math of how expensive healthcare actually is. And so, CJ, I've thought a little bit about this. And again, I will beat the dead horse over treat others the way that you want to be treated. Unfortunately, I've gone through these moments. I do think it's company specific. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about Google or Meta and they're making billions in profit every year, it should be measured in the months. Right? They fucked up. They made a mistake. They can afford it. If you're talking about a Series A company that's trying to stay alive and has less than 2 years of runway, it shouldn't be 0, but I also don't think it should be months. I think 4 weeks is probably fair.
Yeah.
I think it's contextual as it relates to the company, the stage, the size, and the revenue.
I completely agree with that. And to just have empathy, because as Nolan said, I agree at the end, it's the company's fault. Maybe even for low performers. Did you hire the wrong person? Were they not supported? You have to take accountability for that. And sometimes because we're so annoyed because someone's not getting it or they're not performing or they're unruly or we're pressured, we forget about that. And when we forget about that, we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we don't kind of see these people as humans and something that we are responsible for. And I think now we're seeing people being a lot more judicious with hiring because of these things, right? Do we need this hire? That's thoughtful. 3 years ago, it was hire. You have to be responsible with your hiring because that's the input.
But Kelli, all things equal, let's say the company is in the same spot financially. The person is not performing well and it's clearly the individual that hasn't lived up to what you thought it would be versus the company has to eliminate a role and it's the company's fault. Should the packages be the same, hypothetically?
They should not, because that person, theoretically, the low performer should get nothing, but you're having what should be weeks, if not months, of very direct, clear conversations around improvement and or what happened if it doesn't happen. So it shouldn't be a surprise. This is where the shortcut comes in, where that doesn't fucking happen. And they're like, oh, Nolan's terrible. We never told Nolan he's terrible. We want him to leave next week. But you didn't tell him he wasn't terrible. Now you have to pay him because he's going to come after you from wrongful termination. That's what happens.
A gal that reported to me, one of her favorite strategies with low performers is pipper package.
Yeah, a fork.
So explain that. What's that?
So pipper package is essentially like we've been talking about somebody's performance for at least a couple of weeks and it's not going well. And the business is basically ready to move on. And it's a come to Jesus conversation to where, hey, it doesn't feel like it's working here. Your performance hasn't changed. You have two choices. You can do this PIP in which like we'll give you 30 days to turn your performance around. 95% of employees don't survive the PIP. And then if you don't make it, then we're not going to give you anything on the way out. Or we can give you a package today, which is usually the same duration as the PIP, to leave right now. You can transition gracefully and focus entirely on your next opportunity. I think what Kelly's actually describing is something that's under discussed. Actually, I think companies are giving low performers the same package as they are people that are impacted by RIFs because they're not having these candid discussions and they're using it as a backstop to ensure that they don't have employment litigation.
Right. And they are also thinking about the runway of that person to avoid that litigation. Can I give them this runway in the form of a package and go, which saves me, the company, manager, HR, time, money, effort for those 30 days, which could be more expensive than the salary to help them get up to a certain point.
So there is a math equation at play here.
Time and money.
Low performers usually get incentives to gracefully go and sign a separation agreement, which they release claims. People want that.
Nolan, you brought up some high profile names earlier of big companies that seem like safe bets. At least to the employee, it was the illusion of security. I have a close friend who was recently part of a very unexpected layoff at one of the big e-commerce food delivery marketplaces. People can probably guess which one of the couple out there. And we were kicking around the idea of he thought he was in a safe bet. He thought he was in a stable thing. He had no idea that he saw it coming. And this is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. And I'm at a Series C company under 150 people. And I was saying to him, hey, I feel like at smaller companies, this may be a contrarian opinion, I actually feel like I have more of an idea of what's going on. I can choose my own destiny or at least know what's coming down the pike. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think there's been an illusion that big companies equal safety. And I think that illusion has been revealed as a falsity. Like it's not real. And you're seeing it more and more. And the amount of people that are stunned at big companies from these layoffs shows exactly that the contract has changed. That's what I mentioned earlier. So look, I mean, are early stage companies safer? I think you have to like define what safety means. Do they actually reach product market fit? Like if we're talking about venture-backed tech companies, do they get to venture scale? Those are the inherent risks. Typically, you're taking less cash when you go to these companies. Your RSUs or your equity is not easily liquidated. And so I think those are the inherent risks. But I've typically found, I think the thing you're describing, CJ, is you know where you stand.
Right.
And isn't that interesting? At an earlier stage company, you have more clarity of where you stand because your impact is more tangible.
And where the company stands.
Totally. Yeah, you have more visibility.
You're closer to the reality of what's going on.
Exactly, Kelly.
People also, it's funny, I've been on both sides of the fence, and I don't want to say honest or like better here, but people are just kind of more straight up, maybe because they all know more. Maybe in these larger companies, they don't know, they can't be. But I feel like it's just more transparent. Like, here's what's going on. maybe things aren't held as close to the vest.
Well, it's harder to hide. You
Yeah.
can't, it's like if the revenue's down for the quarter, like typically everyone knows.
Everyone sees the line. But the safety in the larger companies, I mean, we can all probably say, you know that if it happens, even if you get surprised, you're not going to get a shitty package.
Right.
But I think your marketability, that's the thing I think has changed faster than anything, is like early stage companies view big company experience now as a negative signal.
Say more about that, because I'm not sure if I agree, but say it again.
So if you've worked at Google for like the past 10 years and your only experience is in Google, I was talking to somebody recently who was asking me for advice. They're having a very hard time finding a job. And on paper, you'd be stunned. You're like, wait, like this person had a promotion trajectory and got to director level and cannot find a job right now. And she was like, I don't know what's going on. And I was like, well, I think what's going on is that smaller companies, in which that's where she's now optimized for, are looking at your big company experience as a negative signal.
Correct.
Because the story that smaller companies are saying is, oh, you couldn't do anything with less than 100 people. You actually didn't do anything other than like have meetings and manage people all day long. Like you didn't do any real work. And you had such deep product market fit at these you don't even realize what it's like to build and go compete against a behemoth like that.
It's not translating. I talked to someone yesterday from a bigger, well-known company. They're interviewing, HR leaders, HR VP level leaders. And he goes, I've interviewed like 5 of these people from Google. And I'm like, we do workshops, they do presentations. It's really cool. And he goes, tell me about a transformational project initiative that you led, that you did. And it's like crickets. It's like, what? An employee survey? And he's like, what's going on with Google? And then I'm like, look, I'm not saying there's not great people there, but they're not moving. And that bias is real. Like that translation to, can you do this? And as it goes on, it's these companies are becoming less sexy in that respect.
Charlie Keevers, who's the CFO at Carta, gave me like the best compliment ever one time. He goes, the thing about you is that you've been forged in the fire.
Yeah.
And it turns out that like resilience is a learned skill. And look, I'm not saying Google and Meta don't have challenges, right? They certainly have challenges, but they don't have like we need to scratch and claw to survive that other companies that are at an earlier stage have. I mean, 90% of businesses, 95% of businesses fail.
The scars don't run as deep.
It's just not real life.
Rest and vest is a real thing. And I'm not saying that's not great. I mean, I'm not judging it. I'm just saying
it's a narrative.
It's just a different planet.
And look, it's not everyone at these companies. Like,
totally.
I know many people who are working their asses off inside of these companies. So like, let me be clear about that. But I will say, you have to be aware of the external narrative of you. And I always tell my friends that are at these companies what I think and what basically I hear other early stage CEOs saying about profiles like theirs. And I think the thing you need to do is like, 1, be aware of the external narrative. 2, have a story for that narrative. And 3, Kelli and I talked about this yesterday, always be networking, always invest in your network. And it's like, oh, well, like, I'm working here and I have a family. And it's like, it doesn't matter. The way that you become recession proof is by building a network that you can rely on when you go through a hardship.
And my only add to that is if you're in these companies, push yourself like once every 2 weeks, reflect, don't get complacent. Don't atrophy. Are you doing shit that you're like stretching, pushing? Are you trying to find those things within the company, even networking within that company, right? If your ass is callous at the end of the week because you're sitting there just chatting about stuff all day for 10 hours, that is a problem.
What do you think of the people who say what company they work at on their LinkedIn profile, but right next to it, they say like ex Meta or ex YouTube or ex Goldman Sachs? I think that's kind of like as if you had like a dating profile and then you said ex-girlfriend or boyfriend this, ex-girlfriend or boyfriend that. It pisses me off so much when people do that. Like, why didn't you just stay at that company if you liked it so much? What are you trying to signal to us?
Well, it turns out that humans have biases. And CJ, like, we're just learning what yours is. And I think we went through this era to where like we tried to remove human bias. And like we should obviously have awareness of our biases, but the reality is this is how we've evolved. And so now we're at this stage to where, especially in tech, those are negative signals, right? Like if you worked at Google at Big G in some capacity, you didn't get promoted for 5 years and you're just like floating, like the story that early stage founders are telling themselves about you is that you didn't work. You didn't do anything. You were just a cog in the machine. Whether or not it's true, that's the bias. And I've taken a lot of shit for saying stuff like this out loud. And I'm not saying it to be an arrogant asshole. I'm saying it so people understand what the external narrative is. Because otherwise, it just happens in back channels.
I judge people so hard. I'll say, like, if you've like X, you both might have this on your LinkedIn. I don't know. But if somebody's like, I am X JP Morgan, and now they're working in like finance inside a startup, it's like, all right, so you're trying to say like, you're afraid of your image because I don't know what that startup is.
I don't have
like,
that,
all right,
CJ.
you can't have it both ways where it's like, I'm taking a risk and I want this upside and I want to build something. But also look over here. I have the lended credibility of something I used to do or a company that I'm no longer at and taking credit for it.
I don't do that. I'm too jaded in tech to even have this chat. It's silly. But I will say just objectively, when I was between Intuit and Yahoo, it was almost 10 years. And I knew I wanted to go into venture. I knew I wanted to go into a more entrepreneurial environment and startup. It was the biggest feedback I got, getting that first early stage number one role. That's going to be the hardest leap between these two planets, is that first one. And then it will just go. But it was the biggest bias.
Isn't it weird that we're saying it's actually harder to go downstream?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I wouldn't
right?
say it's downstream though. Why are we like? It's just a different.
No, sorry. It's smaller and more impactful. That's what I mean by it. Because you're going from something known to unknown.
They're like, are you nimble? Can you build? Can you execute? Can you pivot? Are you rigid? I mean, all these biases. Sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not.
I talked to somebody 2 days ago who literally had only worked at big tech companies for the last 10 years. And is now trying to get a job from a Series A through Series C company and is getting like crickets responses. And she's like, but like I went 0 to 1 inside these companies. And I'm like, I'm just going to be really honest with you. Yeah. You didn't. Like, you did not.
It's like you get to run your own startup from within inside the company.
Yeah, it's a startup within the big company.
They give you the tools to build your own company. It's like, dude, you've clearly never worked at a startup.
That is the least amount of self-awareness. Right? Because like the story that the hiring manager is telling themselves is like, oh my God, I've heard this a million fucking times. No, everyone says that. And it's not
like
true.
Building something within a bigger company.
Yeah. And it's just not true. And maybe it actually is true. You have to understand that your believability is low. And so you have to overcome the believability hurdle. And what I was telling her was like, here's what I would say. If you say that sentence, I was at the startup inside of a big company. The next sentence needs to be, I know you're not going to believe me because everyone fucking says that. And the next sentence needs to be, here's how I'm going to prove it to you.
It's dangerous when the bias gets too strong in either way. You can't say that everyone from Google's great or everyone from Google can't be agile. You just can't.
Just to bookend the segment of big company versus small company, I personally gravitate towards small companies because I enjoy the fast feedback loop of the impact I'm having and feeling like I am building something. Because I also have tried to quote unquote, I'm going to build my own department within this huge company. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing when like survival is on the line.
Department, worst word.
Exactly. I hate that word too. Cost center, even worse word. I call my department strategic overhead for what it's worth.
Big department, X meta.
Do you think that the desirability of working at smaller, scrappier startups has risen over the last 5 to 10 years based on what we've seen at bigger companies?
Without a doubt in my mind. Kelli and I have talked a lot about what is company construction going to look like, which is basically a fancy way of saying, how are companies going to be built? How are they going to hire? What does the internal dynamics look like as we go through the AI revolution, as we're going through this like brutal riff process right now in tech? I am fundamentally of the belief that companies are going to be doing more with less humans. And so the story you tell yourself as a hiring manager is, well, if you were early stage, you already have to do more with less. And so you're more adapted into what this new world is going to look like. And I also think like there is no more, I'm an exec. Like one of the biggest pieces of feedback we heard at Continuum is like, I actually don't want execs. I want fucking doers. And so I think the other piece is when you go early stage, the narrative on your resume, as someone just reads the resume and never talks to you, is, oh, this person actually did shit. They got their hands dirty. And I think that's the reason why.
Yeah. And the pedigree of these companies, again, back to transparency, all these companies have personalities, right? And people know, oh, that company, they went through this. You were there at that time. Holy shit. Like it's just, you kind of know what these companies have gone through, what they're about, what their cultures are, what they've done in the world and the market. And it's hard to tell with the larger companies. So the companies you choose matter. Like, oh shit, you were at Stripe during these years. I don't even need to talk to you. So I do think it's factor of wanting to do this. The cool factor around it is there and the excitement. Then on the other side, it's so funny that people have been doing it for a while, like us, they're all gray and crusty and tired and they're like, I'm done. So it'll be interesting to see like the next crop of folks that spearhead this adventure. It's going to be exciting.
I'm a metrics guy. Kelli, what do you think the average voluntary attrition rate looks like in tech right now?
Yeah, look, the last 2-3 years, I've seen it be interestingly steady. Voluntary has gone way down like the past 18 months, but generally like total attrition is between your 22-25% all in. We've seen voluntary go down a ton. That can be like below 10.
Below 10.
Like 3.5 years ago when I came into Pendo, I was like, super green is like if we can get below 8% voluntary regrettable attrition. That's incredible. That's what it was at Looker. That is a very rare kind of threshold to be under. And you're seeing it now based on the macro. But I will tell you that good talent still has great opportunities.
Good talent with networks.
Good talent with networks. And a lot of these companies, especially you're like, well, the grass isn't greener. Like, the grass is always greener for great people.
What's a good versus bad attrition rate look like these days? Because it can't be nothing, right? If it's nothing.
You never want to be too high or too low.
I don't know if there is a good attrition rate. Like
that's why I stopped reporting on it, like to the board.
Yeah, I think that's smart because attrition can get into this intellectual conversation and you can compare company to company, but like it actually doesn't matter. I think the reasons why people are leaving is more interesting, right? Are they leaving because they don't believe in the company? Are they leaving because they're going to found companies? Those are completely different reasons, right? and so like, why are they leaving?
Or the patterns of who? Right. Are all these SDRs and revenue just taking off?
Is this the go-to-market team that just is like, and so that's where I think it's more interesting. I think attrition as a metric by itself with like no other click-in data is not interesting at all.
Because you're just going to get the same shit. You're going to get voluntary, regrettable, 10, 12 plus or minus, total 22, 25 plus or minus. Like it's been that way for 3 years at Pendo. That's just what it is. And I'm guessing it's similar other places. What matters is who and where and when and why and what patterns. And that's where people usually don't dig into.
One of the things Kelli and I have talked a bit about is this notion of like, where are you from? What companies have you worked at? And one of the things that makes where you're from awesome is if that company is churning out, like ex-employees are starting companies or doing other great things. Like if the alumni network is incredibly strong, then it's a positive reflection of the company, even though those people aren't working there anymore.
Totally.
And so I think like, as it relates to attrition, say regrettable attrition, right? Well, yes, it's regrettable because this person doesn't work here anymore and they're not solving problems for us. But if they're going and starting a company and raising venture money, for example, like that's one of us in the alumni network. And the other thing too is I've seen more boomerangs in the last like few years of people going out and trying something and it didn't work and then they go back. Right. And so I don't think that these moments in time when you look at just attrition as a stat, it doesn't tell the whole story and it doesn't tell, I actually think, any part of the narrative.
Yeah. And it's just like customer churn, right? There's churning at the bottom, wasn't a good fit. And then there's churning at the top that you were so successful.
Great metaphor.
Exactly. And the whole attitude on attrition has shifted. It used to be this taboo. People are leaving. Like,
Yeah.
it's all different now. Like, we're all going through these evolutions and journeys and networks and go here and build this. Let's go here and do this. So you should take that person. I love how it's kind of changing in that regard, because it used to be just kind of icky and how we thought about it and talked about it. And Nolan and I have talked about this a lot, and just being honest that at some point people are going to move on for all different reasons, and to celebrate that when it should be celebrated.
Yeah.
Because nothing's worse than great talent leaving on a high to go do something bigger and their boss being a total fucking prick about it. It's a bad look. It's insecure.
It's short-sighted.
It's
a bad business decision, as you said earlier.
And that reaction means that leader has not been planning appropriately. So now they're taking it out on this person because they're not leading correctly. Like that is just the worst thing you can do, is treat someone great poorly for going and doing something bigger.
Is quiet quitting over, or is that still a thing? And I asked because I saw this other funny TikTok video where this guy was complaining publicly that his manager the night before put like an 8 a.m. call on his calendar, and he had a workout class then. And so he declined it because he's like, this is before my working hour. Did you see it? And then the manager clapped back online, and there was this whole back and forth. And I was like kind of making fun of the guy, but like I wanted to stand up and say like the thing from the back, the meme of the guy like saying the thing that nobody wants to say, like 8 a.m. meetings suck.
8 a.m. meetings do suck.
I mean, they do.
Agree with that. Yeah, quiet quitting's still happening. I'll keep saying it, but the contract between employer and employee is changing. And one of the things that I think Kelli and I are saying, Kelli, we haven't actually like done the click in on this, but like when we're saying network, the analogy I like to use is fishing.
Lines in the water, baby.
You got it, right? If you only cast one line, right, the best you can do is catch one fish. But if I'm casting like 15, 20 lines, you never know when like the big one might hit, even though I have 19 other lines in the water, including the one where I'm really investing all of my time. So I guess like define quiet quitting, I think in the term of during the Great Resignation period when people were just like completely checked out and like basically not working and working at another company, I think that that's been drastically reduced. I don't think it's going to be over, but I think it's been drastically reduced because if you're not working in today's environment in tech, your manager's like a proctologist, like looking up your ass to make sure that you're actually performing because their manager is looking up their ass to make sure that their team is performing. So I would say it's a lot less than it was during the Great Resignation period.
Yeah. But I mean, look, quiet quitting, Great Resignation, this shit's always been here. People were quiet quitting 25 years ago. They'll be quiet quitting 25 years from now. It depends on the company, the culture, the team, the manager, the person, and how you run that.
Okay, maybe a lighter one to end on here.
I love how CJ, by the way, he just so innocently drops these. So what about... It's a skill, and I appreciate it.
Hopefully I'm not blindsiding you here.
No.
So casually, what do you think about whatever happened to that guy in Indie Hackers who's working like 5 engineering jobs all during the ZERP era? Do you think he got laid off by all 5?
So one of the big conversations right now is return to office. And one of the reasons why CEOs want employees to return to the office is because
you can't return to 5.
Because shit like this, right, gets out and then you ruin it for everybody who's actually fucking productive in a remote scenario. Yeah. You know, what happened to this guy? I don't know. I would guess that like the proctology exam came, he failed, and then he got fired.
We had a guy, we thought he was doing sales, but he was also selling fax machines. So
how did you find out?
He never updated his LinkedIn profile, and we're in the car business. And so we were joking that like he was going into dealerships like, hey, you want to buy this? No, huh? You guys are using a lot of paper here, a lot of paper when you buy a car. We're saying he must have been like the 10 times Xerox salesman of the year.
While we're at it, that might seem like a funny, like trite thing, but when people don't update their LinkedIn profile, it's a flag, man. I had someone who worked for me and they didn't work out. It wasn't good.
Yeah, the little things are the big things to me in that. This has been a blast with the original duo of the Salem Witch Trials.
Always.
Thank you for joining me. It's always fun to hang out with you both.
Thanks for the time, CJ.
Always. All right, CJ. Thanks.
Roll the credits, producer Natalie. Run the Numbers is part of the Turpentine Podcast Network. It is produced by Natalie Torin and edited by Justin Golden. Album artwork by Some AI Thing. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. If you made it this far, please give us 5 stars. I really need this.